Harvest of Souls, A Forbidden Trade by D. Coyote. Jack eyed the vibrantly colored jar of emotions on his desk, fighting off a wave of conflicting emotions. The room was semi-darkened, illuminated only by the eerie glow of holographic screens displaying various charts and data streams. He braced himself for another sale. He knew he shouldn't be doing this, but the lure of money was too great to ignore. His hands hovered over the keyboard, fingers ready to initiate the complicated transaction protocols. Then the door whooshed open and Emily, whose visor glowed as she decrypted shipment data, walked in with a slim datapad. "Got the metrics for the new shipment. Looks promising," she said in her characteristic detached tone. Jack grinned at her while initiating the cryptographic handshake sequence required to authenticate the emotional energy shipment from the supplier's servers. Emily's visor pulsed with code as it updated itself. "Seems legit. I'll start the full decryption process now," she confirmed. After confirming every detail checked out, Jack settled back into his chair, feeling a mix of exhilaration and guilt. Meanwhile, in Neo-Boston, Detective Marcus Williams slammed a hefty stack of papers down on his desk in the Neo-Boston Police Department. "I can feel it. We're getting close. The emotional energy market has eluded us for too long, but it's going down," he declared, jaw set with determination. His assistant nodded dutifully, accustomed to the detective's tireless crusade against the shadowy, unregulated trade. Emily had almost completed decrypting the shipment data when she was hit by a visor malfunction. Suddenly her lenses were filled with warning codes, red, blinking. She froze. "Jack, you need to look at this. The energy signatures, they're from children." Tears stung at her eyes as she looked up at Jack, horrified by what she'd uncovered. He stared at the pulsing jar, its swirling colors now holding a sinister meaning. Emily hurriedly pulled up the incriminating data patterns on the central holo display. There was no doubt. This supposedly top-tier shipment had been unethically harvested from a vulnerable population. Jack felt his gut lurch sickeningly at her words. He stared at the pulsing jar, and knew that he and Emily could no longer ignore the terrible truth buried within it. His fingers trembled as he commanded, "Stop the authentication process. We need to investigate this further." Emily gave a terse nod, relief evident in her usually impassive face. She swiftly initiated a remote hack into the supplier's servers to trace the origin of the vile shipment. In a decisive move, Jack disconnected his system from the supplier's server with an urgent keystroke. He held Emily's gaze for a moment before uttering, "We don't have to do this. We need to find more moral sources of energy." She gave him an approving nod and the ghost of a smile. Detective Williams's assistant entered with payment records linking a recent emotional energy sale to a notorious child trafficking ring. The detective clenched his jaw and said through gritted teeth, "This could be our chance to take them down." Jack's eyes were drawn to the mysterious jar filled with malicious energy. His hands trembled as he walked it over to the hazardous materials disposal chute and emptied its contents into nothingness. He looked up at Emily and barely whispered, "I can't be part of this sickening system anymore," and knew there was no going back. They had condemned themselves in their fight against the rising corruption. Moments later, Jack received an encrypted message from the irate supplier. "You'll regret turning down our business." A mirthless chuckle escaped his lips as he realized how dangerous this mission would be, challenging their morals, skills, and very lives. But for the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of a long-dormant conscience. The next several days passed in a flurry of activity, as Jack frantically unraveled his tangled web of connections within the emotional energy market. Emily worked tirelessly to erase any trace of their involvement while Jack tried to determine their next course of action. He sat at his computer, scrolling through files and weighing the risks of various options, when he noticed Emily pausing in her work to watch him with a supportive gaze. Her unwavering faith in him spurred him on, and soon they had a plan. They would use their knowledge of the inner workings of the market to take it down from the inside. Meanwhile, Detective Williams was running into roadblocks in his investigation into illegal emotional energy harvesting. Every lead seemed to reach a dead end, and he threw up his hands in frustration. "They can't have vanished," he muttered under his breath, going over all the evidence for what felt like the 100th time. But just as he was about to give up hope, a glimmer of an idea sparked in his mind. 3 tension-filled days dragged on as Emily and Jack waited in 2 small rooms, silently trading glances across the glowing holographic displays. Emily scanned the encrypted dark web channels for any signs of detection or tracking, while Jack jumped at every sound outside, sure that the police would come bursting in with guns blazing. Then came the news they had been dreading. Their former supplier had made contact with Sin, an infamous crime syndicate that had its tendrils spread deep into every corner of society. "They're looking for us," Emily announced grimly. "If they want to find us, they will." Jack's knuckles whitened as he clenched his fists in frustration. Not only was Detective Williams on their trail, now a vengeful supplier wanted them dead too. It seemed like there was no way out, until Jack finally decided enough was enough. "No more waiting around then," he declared with newfound determination. "We need to use our intel to bring down this toxic system once and for all." This time Emily's lips curved into a full-fledged grin. Nodding her agreement, she quickly outlined an audacious plan to dismantle Sin from the inside out. Though it seemed impossible to break up such an insidious organization, they both knew they possessed the skills and insight to give it a shot. Taking a deep breath, Jack steeled himself. If there was any chance of regaining control of their future, this was it. After days of gathering intel that characterized the shadowy Sin syndicate, Jack began meticulously planning to breach their systems in order to leak compromising data to the authorities. "We created complex network diagrams detailing critical communication nodes vulnerable to hacks." Emily showed him the elaborate maps she'd compiled detailing the interconnections between headquarters and subsidiaries all around the globe. Adrenaline hummed in Jack's veins. Dangerous as this gambit was, it felt good to take action against the forces of darkness instead of profiting from them. Of course, Sin was no amateur operation. "Getting past their quantum encryption will be a nightmare," Emily warned as they prepared. "We'll only have one shot at this." Jack steeled himself and squeezed her shoulder. "Let's give them hell," he said with a roguish wink, earning a whispered Godspeed from his partner in return. Together they plunged into the shady inner workings of Sin. Hours later, Jack sat back from the holographic interface, rubbing his bleary eyes as Emily continued trying to penetrate Sin's security. His novice hacking skills were no match for her expertise, but he could provide moral support. And hopefully soon, they'd land the devastating blow needed to expose Sin's crimes. A jarring beep from the central console snapped Jack back to reality. "What's that?" he barked, his heart pounding. Emily's fingers flew across the console as her mind raced. "Proximity alarm. We're in trouble," she spat out urgently. "Could be the police, or Sin tracing our hack." A chill of fear rippled through Jack's veins. They had been so careful. How had they been discovered? "Can you scramble their sensors so they can't pinpoint us?" he asked desperately. Emily nodded vigorously and began typing furiously at the holographic interface until a pulse of distorted energy radiating outward silenced the proximity alarm. "That should jam their sensors," she said relievedly. Jack forced a shaky laugh. Another close call thanks to Emily's genius. But it was a reminder that one wrong move could spell disaster for them both. As Jack glanced at her, he wondered if Emily had any regrets about their choices thus far. But her expression told him nothing. The sudden stillness made Jack reflect on how he had arrived here. So many years living an immoral life, turning a blind eye to all the suffering caused by his illegal emotional energy sales. He shuddered at how callous his old self had been, and promised himself never to go back. A muffled boom in the distance jarred Jack from his introspection. He darted to the surveillance screen. The scrambled proximity sensors still showed nothing outside. "They're searching for us," Emily guessed tersely. She locked eyes with Jack, communicating a silent promise. Whatever came through that door, they would face it together, united by conscience. Jack gave a sharp nod and moved to turn off the interior lights. If the end was here, they would not go quietly into the night. The distant sounds of doors being broken down snapped Jack and Emily to high alert. Jack's pulse thundered in his ears as he watched the feed from the exterior camera. Any minute now their sanctuary would be invaded, their future ripped away. Emily reached over and gave his hand a fierce squeeze. He clung to that point of warmth as despair threatened to swallow him. With a deafening crash, their reinforced door splintered inwards. Jack hurtled himself protectively in front of Emily, prepared to defend them to the last. Dust swirled. His ears rang from the explosion. Through the haze, several armed figures clad in night vision goggles approached. Jack braced himself, muscles coiled, when a familiar authoritative voice barked, "Nobody move! This is Detective Williams. You're under arrest." Jack went limp with shock. It was the police, not Sin. Relief warred with dismay. Out of the frying pan into the fire, it seemed. As Williams slapped handcuffs on him, Jack exchanged a silent look with Emily. They had escaped a criminal syndicate only to land in the hands of the law. But perhaps, Jack realized with fresh nerves, this was the opportunity they needed to safely expose the horrors of the emotional energy market from within the justice system. Their gambit wasn't over yet. In a dimly lit interrogation room, Detective Williams loomed like an ancient stone statue over Jack. His gravelly voice sliced through the air as he pressed Jack for information on the emotional energy market. Jack remained silent, grappling with his conflicting emotions. On one hand, he had managed to avoid tangles with the law for years by staying in the shadows of the market. But now fate had intervened, and he was faced with an impossible decision. "I know you're a key player in the underground emotional energy trade," Williams said, his fists planted on the table. "And mark my words, you're going to tell me everything you know." Jack felt his mouth go dry as sandpaper and weighed his options carefully. He could cooperate and face the consequences or remain silent, and suffer whatever punishment that may come. Meanwhile, in another sterile interrogation room down the hall, Emily sat motionless across from a young detective. She replayed all of her missteps that led to their arrest, analyzing each turn like lines of code. The consequences of her actions weighed heavy on her mind as she considered offering insight and knowledge of the emotional energy market's workings for a chance at freedom. It was risky play, but she knew she would have to make a choice soon. Later, in the sparse holding cell, Emily and Jack discussed their options in hushed tones. "We're in the lion's den now," Jack warned her. "If we make a deal, there's no turning back." Emily gave a curt nod, her expression grim as they both tried to reconcile their conflicting emotions. "The market's eyes are everywhere," Emily muttered. "We'd have to disappear, go deep underground." Her voice trailed off as they imagined the life awaiting them in witness protection should they expose the market's rotten secrets. Jack sighed, shoulders slumping. The choice loomed before them, a terrible crucible from which they could emerge reborn, or condemned utterly. Williams returned, his hard-soled shoes clicking ominously on the tile floor. Jack tensed as the detective towered over them, his craggy face creased with determination. "I know you possess evidence that can bring down the emotional energy market for good," Williams rasped. "Encrypted data, supplier names, payoff records. I want it all." His grip tightened on Jack's shoulder, an unspoken threat. Jack and Emily exchanged a pregnant look. The shadowy market was the only world they knew, but its glimmering promise had long since darkened, leaving them lost in a labyrinth of complicity and compromise. Emily took a breath, her decision made. "We'll give you the intel you need," she said steadily. "Bring these soulless vermin into the light." A shiver ran down Jack's spine, but he nodded. They had chosen to plunge into the light. In an isolated room at the precinct, Jack's fingers flew across a keyboard, slicing through encrypted data with practiced ease. Seamlessly, he extracted reams of evidence detailing the market's sprawling operations. Payoffs, client lists, distribution records. Emily supervised, gaze darting between screens. This data was their only bargaining chip to avoid lifetime imprisonment for their shadowy conduct. Amid the streams of data, Emily noticed strange energy pattern sequences, devoid of identifying metadata. "This must be from the encrypted inner servers," she murmured. "It looks almost alien." Unease rippled through her. Just what were they dealing with here? Jack met her gaze, lips pressed in a grim line. They had caught a glimpse of the market's enigmatic origins, but the answer only spawned deeper questions. Under Williams's watchful eye, Jack and Emily scoured the data for anything incriminating on the market's key players. Adrenaline hummed through Jack's veins, despite the circumstances. He was an athlete again, moving with precision and purpose after years adrift. Emily's monitor flashed a hellish red, signaling the imminent breach of their system. "Artemis, it has to be him," she spat through gritted teeth. Jack's heart raced as he quickly assessed the attack. Artemis was attempting to override their fail-safes and claim a massive energy shipment from the now-defunct facility. "We've got 24 hours before he shuts us out completely." His mind reeled with possibilities as he contemplated the dangerous market inventory still housed in the abandoned facility that could not fall into Artemis's sinister hands. Williams rapidly mobilized a raid to apprehend Artemis and his henchmen, but even cuffed in a cruiser headed to the facility, Jack and Emily knew any encounter with the volatile smuggler could erupt into chaos. Clenching his fists, Jack wished he could shoulder this storm alone and keep Emily safe, though her unyielding grip on his arm communicated her fierce resolve. Williams led their team, weapons drawn, through desolate corridors towards the central server hub. Dread thrummed in Jack's chest being back here again, a physical reminder of his moral drift these past years, praying this mission would atone for his sins. Jack initiated the irreversible purge sequence while Emily worked to decrypt the final failsafe with minutes to spare. Bracing himself against mounting pressure, he watched the deletion progress bar inch forward impatiently. "Come on," he muttered through gritted teeth. A deafening alarm suddenly pierced Jack's concentration. "Perimeter sensors triggered. Breach in south wing," Williams bellowed over comms. Jack's stomach dropped. Artemis had arrived with no intention of letting anyone stand in his way. The heavy footfalls of Artemis's henchmen thundered in Jack's ears, closing fast. A dark panic surged in his chest as he and Emily worked frantically to outpace the deletion sequence. Just a few more seconds. The doors tore open before them, revealing an army of armed men with arachnid-like weapons aimed their way. "Step away from the controls," one ordered, but it was too late. A deep voice bellowed from behind them. "You've interfered with my business for the last time." Artemis loomed like a shadow, eyes blazing with fury. Without warning, his men opened fire. Chaos erupted through the room as bullets flew around Jack and Emily. Williams's team returned fire, but Artemis seemed immune to it all. He charged toward the central server, heedless of the crossfire lancing through the air. Jack knew if Artemis reached it, all their work would be for nothing. Desperately, Emily triggered one final measure, rerouting the facility's emergency power to generate a kinetic blast wave. "Down!" Jack yelled, just before a shockwave of energy exploded outward, sending everyone flying. When the sparks cleared, Artemis's men lay motionless on the ground, and the query sequence finished. Success. But their triumph was short-lived. From the smoke emerged Artemis, undeterred by their efforts. With one meaty hand, he crushed the metal casing of the server hub as if it were cardboard. Sparks flew wildly as the deletion sequence stuttered and died, only half complete. "Did you really think you could stop me?" Artemis rumbled, stalking forward. With each step, his laugh reverberated through the room like a clap of thunder, until he stood just feet away from Jack and Emily. Dread flooded over Jack as he scrambled backward. They had failed. The precious cargo still remained ripe for Artemis's taking. Suddenly, Williams charged into the room, weapon raised and aimed straight at Artemis. "Hands in the air or I will fire," he shouted. His team swarmed around him, ready to make their arrests of all of Artemis's henchmen. The smug smuggler gave Jack and Emily a terrifying smirk and then slowly lifted his hands in jestful surrender, a gesture that made Jack's blood run cold. They may have won this battle, but now they were marked by powerful enemies who knew their names. With every secret they revealed about the market, they felt as if they were cutting open an infected wound that might never heal. Jack gently helped Emily up from the ground, not knowing if they had the courage to go any further, and reveal what lay hidden beneath it all. Jack stared at the barren walls of their refuge, his head pounding from the weight of his choices. Destroying the corrupted energy shipment had severed his connection to his old life, leaving him adrift in unknown waters. Emily sat nearby, eyes focused intently on her monitors filled with convoluted code and data. Jack envied her capacity to lose herself in logical patterns and get away from it all, an escape he wanted for himself. "Sequence is still stable," Emily said, without looking away from her screen. Their makeshift purging program was all that stood between them and disaster now. Jack nodded weakly, attempting to concentrate on what needed to be done, yet being ravished by guilt and uncertainty like a turbulent tide. He had cast them into this limbo, but for what? The future held no assurances, only terrible trade-offs. Detective Williams sifted through case files with remarkable concentration, alive with the possibility of finally snaring his white whale. Facial recognition had flagged 2 suspects near the energy facility right before its annihilation. "Go through interstate databases using these photos," he commanded his team tersely. "I want everything there is to know about these individuals, friends, family, parking tickets. Nothing must go unnoticed." His employees scrambled to obey. Williams had been waiting years for this opportunity in the case. Whoever these people were, they held answers which could unravel the entire sinister energy market. He planned to wrench everything from them. In their shadowy safe house, Jack assisted Emily with diagnostics on the restraint system controlling the remaining energy samples. Each test created greater turmoil in his stomach. Emily glanced at the monitor, her jaw tightening in concern. The purple numbers of the containment chamber's immune field had become erratic, and they both knew the consequences. If the energy escaped its confines, it could spell disaster for half the city. Before Jack could even start to panic, Emily reached out and placed a hand on his arm. "Hey, we'll figure this out," she said softly. Her unyielding gaze met his, conveying more confidence than he felt inside. At the precinct, Williams was surprised to see an urgent report appear on his desk. Anomalous energy readings had been detected at an abandoned building on the edge of town. This was what his team had been tracking for months now, and he knew that this could be their moment of truth. He called up his task force immediately and readied them for action. Back at the safe house, Jack and Emily disagreed about how to deal with the growing issue. As each new test revealed flaws in their containment methods, doubt began to creep in. Desperate for answers, Jack secretly met with Artemis in an old barn littered with artifacts from bygone eras. Though he had questioned whether or not going to him was a mistake afterward, Emily reassured him that Artemis was no authority on right or wrong. They had to press forward no matter what. Emily faced her monumental task with a grim determination, working feverishly to convert the lab's excess tau particles into a neutralizing field. With time running out and Jack in jeopardy, she put faith in the yet untested science before her. But as Emily completed her device and prepared for the reaction, a voice boomed suddenly. "Stay right there." Jack whirled to see Artemis standing at the lab entrance, gun leveled and eyes burning with rage. Knowing they had no choice but to proceed, Jack seized the chance and shouted to Emily, "Now!" She slammed her hand down and the machine erupted with blinding light. Artemis rushed forward in fury, but it was too late. The neutralization had begun. In an instant, Jack was upon him, tackling him to the ground and sending his gun skittering away. Despite Artemis's taunts of foolishness, Jack refused to look back. His conscience drove him forward. The energy levels sank slowly until at last they faded into nothingness. Williams burst through the door just as Jack rose to his feet, gun drawn and demanding answers. Standing tall against judgment, he accepted his fate without regret. A new dawn was here. Rage boiled in Williams's eyes, but he was powerless. His hard-earned reward had been snatched away in a matter of seconds, erasing weeks of work to ash. Yet Williams refused to admit defeat. His gaze still burned into Jack's. Next time, no one would escape unscathed. Outside, Jack raised his face to the sky as the sun crested the horizon. Fear and excitement warred within him for control of the future, but Emily's small hand intertwined with his own gave him courage against the shadows ahead. They may have faced an unknown darkness, but they could bear it together, and that knowledge was enough. Exhaustion gnawed at Jack like a relentless beast, tugging at his mind and darkening his mood. He sat in the corner of the ramshackle safehouse, barely registering the cold concrete beneath him. Emily's eyes danced across the data console next to her as she ran calculations, streams of code pouring from her fingertips like water down a waterfall. But instead of answers, only more questions seemed to fill the air around them, questions that seemed to be leading them closer and closer to certain doom. Jack closed his eyes in frustration. Every avenue had been cut off, every bridge burned behind them. Now they were stranded in hostile waters with no way out or any path forward. Detective Marcus Williams stormed through the station on a mission. He was fueled by a hunger for justice and an utter refusal to accept failure. His search had been fruitless until now. Facial recognition software had flagged 2 known suspects fleeing from an energy facility after it was set ablaze. He was determined to drag any information he could out of their hands, no matter how much it hurt. "I want every detail on these 2. Friends, family, parking tickets, everything," he bellowed. His team all scrambled to obey his orders without delay. This was William's chance to uncover the corruption lying deep within the city's heart. He craved knowledge and retribution. Jack paced restlessly across the safe-house floor, as Emily frantically worked on preserving what remained of their containment system. The system degraded with each passing second, bringing them ever closer to disaster which would claim countless innocent lives in its wake as punishment for his disobedience. Jack's sleepless nights had dragged on endlessly and yielded no answers, only his doubts growing stronger with each passing hour. He felt as if he had weighed down them both with a curse, and for what? The future seemed bleak now, filled only with the prospect of terrifying sacrifice. Emily gazed up at him, her eyes blazing with confidence. "We'll make it through this," she declared. Jack attempted a faint smile in return, desperately wishing that he could share in her optimism. But the surface appeared to be an insurmountable distance away now, and he felt himself being pulled further and further into despair. A sharp rap at the door shattered the silence. Jack and Emily exchanged an alarmed glance. No one should know they were here. Jack crept to the door, muscles coiled tight, and risked a look through the peephole. A tall figure in a trench coat and hat stood in the hall, face obscured. Jack's heart seized. This was it. The reckoning had arrived. "Open up. This is Detective Williams, NBPD. I just want to talk," the man called out gruffly. Jack reeled back, panic rising in his throat. Williams had found them, despite all their precautions. His mind raced through their limited options. Running was futile, but surrender held its own perils. He turned to Emily, but she was already typing furiously into a console, enacting protocols they had prayed never to use. "I'm deploying electromagnetic shielding to block his senses. That should buy us a little time," she said. Jack's shoulders sagged with relief. Once again, Emily's ingenuity had preserved their fragile hope against the coming storm. "We'll find a way out of this. There must be something we missed," he said. Emily gave a terse nod, but shadows swirled in her eyes. She had already run 1,000 calculations, war-gamed every conceivable scenario as the vice slowly closed around them. But the equation remained unchanged. All paths led to the same stark reckoning. Williams pounded on the door, impatience rising. His intel had assured this location, yet no signs of life stirred within. A faulty lead was unacceptable. Too much depended on this. He pulled out a sensor wand and waved it over the door, scowling as the display registered only garbled static. Some type of signal jammer then. Well, they wouldn't evade him for long. "Tactical Team A, converge on my location. We have them cornered." Williams allowed himself a grim smile. Like rats in a trap. Now they had nowhere left to run or hide. He would have the truth no matter what it took. Justice brooked no compromise. Jack had slumped against the wall, his mind awhirl with uncertainty. Emily's hand on his shoulder bolstered him slightly, but it was still hard to ignore the doubts that weighed in his heart. "We can't give up now," she said softly. "Not when there's so much at stake." Jack shook his head. He wanted to trust their instincts, but what if they had been wrong? The consequences were too awful to contemplate. As if sensing his thoughts, Emily took his hand, and he felt her determination radiating from her body like heat. "Those children," she said fiercely, her words ringing in the air. "Think of what they have sacrificed for us. We won't turn away from this. We can't." Jack straightened, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over him once more. He could not deny the truth of her words. The choice they had made had not been taken lightly, and if sacrifice was asked of them, then so be it. He had stood firm in the face of danger before. He would do so again. In the weak light, Emily's face seemed etched in marble. So calm and resolute was her expression. Jack envied that steadiness, a counterweight to the mad rage of emotion that stormed within him. No heat flowed from her, just icy purpose. She led Jack through the rear entrance into a cavernous warehouse, empty save massive cylinders covered in control panels and enough cabling to wrap the globe. At the far end loomed an ominous metal sphere, pulsing with dim purple light. "Here goes nothing," Emily muttered. Her fingers danced across the controls with lightning speed. Lights flickered as raw power surged through conduits. The air hummed with energy. Jack braced himself, exhaling slowly. After endless debate and calculation, they had agreed this offered the only slim chance of neutralizing the volatile energy and erasing all traces of their work. Even Emily doubted her own untested theory, but it was all that remained to them. A deafening boom shook the air, followed by a deafening shriek of metal twisting and ripping. Emily's eyes widened in fear as she exclaimed, "They're here. We have no more time." Jack spun around to face the entrance of the warehouse, heart pounding in his chest, as Artemis stepped through the doorway. His eyes burned like wildfire, and he held in his hands an artifact that radiated power. "Do you think you can control forces beyond your comprehension?" He snarled savagely. "I will not allow it." And with those words he activated the device, unleashing a wave of raw energy that sent Jack and Emily flying backwards into the machinery. All went dark as sparks flew everywhere. Jack lay motionless among twisted shards of metal and broken glass. His head throbbed from the waves of power emanating from Artemis's weapon. With supreme effort he looked up just in time to see Emily, her face smeared with blood streaming from a gash on her forehead, desperately trying to repair the dead controls. "Power's out, but the shield has dropped," she shouted over the ringing in his ears. "Williams will be here any second." Despair weighed heavily in Jack's soul. They were so close only to fail at the very end. With a fierce roar, Artemis charged towards the glowing sphere, but Jack put himself between them, stopping Artemis's advance and yelling, "I won't let you unleash this horror on our city." He was no match for Artemis's strength, though, and felt an agonizing pain as he was backhanded viciously across the room. "Your interference comes to nothing," spat Artemis as he stumbled towards the sphere, which then faded away right before their eyes, taking all hope with it. The harsh sound of sirens filled the air, and suddenly crimson light flooded the warehouse. Emily cried out triumphantly, "Surge protection activated! Rerouting all auxiliary power to containment grid!" In shock and dismay, Arthur watched as Emily slammed one final key in place. A deafening whine filled every corner of the warehouse as the sphere lit up with blinding light before unleashing a powerful shockwave that hurled Jack and the others across the room. Then all fell silent. Jack's eyelids fluttered open, as a cloud of smoke and the acrid stench of singed metal assaulted his senses. He squinted through the hazy dimness to take in the destruction spread across what had once been a bustling warehouse. Emily was close nearby. Pushing herself up from the pile of rubble she lay in with a dull moan. Her face was coated in soot and dust, eyes wide with disbelief as they both absorbed their luck in surviving this cataclysmic event. Their attention shifted to where an energy-emitting sphere had teetered precariously on a broken pedestal before erupting in a fireball, sending pieces of smoking debris raining down onto the already ravaged floor. Where it had stood was now only a warped piece of metal, its power reduced to nothingness. Emily let out a long sigh, her voice trembling as she spoke. The energy signature ... IT, quote S gone. We did it. A wave of amazement and relief washed over Jack, and he gave her a dazed smile. Remarkable that these two unlikely heroes could have escaped with their lives after such adversity. The crunch of footsteps cutting through the debris startled them back into focus. Williams emerged from the shadows with a face full of bitter rage. His eyes bored deep into Jack's as if looking for something that should have been there but wasn't. It was clear they had won this battle, yet Williams's determination remained unshaken, and without saying a word he turned around and stalked away. As the city awoke to the break of dawn, Jack and Emily slipped away unnoticed amongst the hustle and bustle of people going about their everyday lives, totally unaware of the danger that had so recently surrounded them. Jack stared upward at the rising sun, feeling some of his exhaustion slip away like cobwebs in its warm embrace, and Emily took his hand gently in hers, cold, but reassuringly real. Despite everything that had occurred today, hope still lingered somewhere within them. As they turned a corner, the street was empty and silent. The sun was rising and cast golden light on the buildings around them. Only one figure stood at the intersection, a little girl with azure radiance emanating from her skin. She looked about 7 years old, but her eyes held an ancient presence, as if she were made of star stuff. Jack froze in surprise when he saw her, pierced by her penetrating stare. When she spoke, her voice reverberated as if from the depths of time and space itself. "The balance you preserved this day spans far beyond your earthly comprehension," she said. "Our gratitude flows to you, instruments of cosmic harmony." Jack fell to his knees, shaken to his core. So the harvested children had not been innocents at all, but entities of unimaginable scope. Their crusade had resonated along invisible threads tying all life together. The girl turned to Jack and offered a beatific smile. Her features were peaceful, serene, like that of an angel. Never before had Jack seen anything so beautiful. A cloud of mist formed around her figure, obscuring it from sight. He released her hand as if he had been burned. Their success had come at great cost, nearly shattering him, but he had weathered that forge of adversity and emerged with his spirit renewed. Though darkness still loomed ahead, he walked with clarity of purpose once more. Thank you for embarking on this riveting journey into Harvest of Souls, A Forbidden Trade by D. Coyote. If this narrative has seized your imagination and moved your spirit, we welcome you to join our ever-growing community. Your insights are valuable, so do drop a comment to express how you feel. Show your support by tapping that like button and make sure to subscribe to not miss out on our next gripping saga from D. Coyote. Your active participation energizes our creative process, helping us weave more mesmerizing stories for you. So stay with us for more, and thank you for being an indispensable part of our storytelling odyssey.